Good afternoon, everybody. On this Wednesday, July 30th, 2025, I have all your stories for your rush hour ride home. We'll be discussing the Candace Owens defamation trial as Candace gives us her updated view about what happened to Brigitte Macron. I'm going to share her thoughts and then I'll give my reaction. If you're new to my channel, we've received thousands of new subscribers. How my content works on the rush hour is we have a morning and afternoon podcast. They're bite-sized, 25, 30 minutes long. And I just give you all of the information of the day. So we will also be discussing the tsunami, the earthquake that happened in Russia, and how it has affected the West Coast. Also, more on the TikTok cult, as our friend Katie from Without a Crystal Ball broke open the TikTok cult story that led to the Netflix documentary. And this week, the house got raided. We'll get her update. And then more on Gaza as the humanitarian aid crisis continues. We also hear from plenty of podcasters and political activists who say, quit donating to AIPAC. Again, quit donating to organizations that lobby for the weapons that are in this senseless war that the majority of our country doesn't want. Okay, it's a heavy topic. We're going to get into that with some Epstein updates. All of this and more starts right now on The Rush. Okie dokie. So before we get into this Candace Owens stuff, which is coming momentarily, just a quick update. Wild visuals coming out after this tsunami hit last night. Here is panicked sea lions diving into the sea as the quake rocks eastern Russia. They're calling it like one of the 10 biggest earthquakes of modern history. Pretty wild stuff. And here, boy, one more reason to never want to go have surgery. This is a view, security footage of a Russian hospital where surgeons were operating on a patient. Could you imagine that during one of the biggest earthquakes? So if you have any surgeries you need to book, try to schedule them around the ground shifting. We don't need that. And in other big news, the first Australian-made rocket crashes 14 seconds after it takes off. How sad is this? The camera wanted to continue panning up, but the rocket, not so much. And my thought with this is like, Australia, you're the most beloved country. Everyone loves Australians. All right, matey, you know? And then all I can imagine as this was happening in the control room is them just going, no. Listen, stay in your lane. Go surfing. Be the fun guy at the party and leave rockets to Elon Musk. He's the one who needs to, have the rockets fail at launch. And speaking of rockets failing at launch, we have Laura Owens' failure to launch. We covered her this morning. If you didn't check out that episode, she is the woman who sued me for harassment as we exposed her fake pregnancy fraud case. She's now being charged with 7 felonies. So just as a word, if you didn't catch that morning episode and you want an update, go check that out. Now, if you're wondering why I haven't given much of a recap on Bachelor in Paradise, I did that on today's episode of the Rose Noir podcast. So here's a public service announcement. If you want to hear my takes on week 5 of Bachelor in Paradise, Rose Noir podcast, go check it out. Just dropped that episode. All right, let's get to Candace Owens. So again, we have a mixed bag of audience. I'll be quite honest. My audience is across the spectrum on what they think of this story. On one end, they think Candace Owens is really stuck and might, lose hundreds of millions of dollars in a lawsuit where she did not heed the warnings to cease and desist talking about Brigitte Macron being a man. This is the First Lady of France. And then there's the other side of people that said, I watched every video about it. There's too much evidence. It has to be true. And my thought is that Candace is allowed her opinion. We're just going to see how this plays out in court. First Amendment rights do not cover defamation. But what we do know is it is not defamatory to simply say somebody is trans. If someone were to say, Dave Neal is gay, I couldn't sue them for defamation because that's not considered something that would be damaging to you. But what the lawsuit entails is Brigitte Macron suing not for being for calling her a man, but the conspiracy that's attached to it, because that itself would be damaging. If she was living this lie, if she was committing identity theft. So that's the allegation that Candace Owens makes. Now, again, it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out in court, because there isn't too much precedence about, a journalist, that's what Candace Owens is, and her speaking about a public figure. In order to prove defamation when you're a public figure, it is a much higher threshold. Now, if Brigitte Macron wants all this to go away, she provides Candace with irrefutable proof through some sort of blood test or things like that. And people get mad when I say that, but that's the onus on the person suing, right? The onus is on them to prove and to debunk what Candace is saying. And again, maybe she already did that in private. We really don't know. Brigitte Macron's side says we've provided them every piece of information they've asked for to prove this. Candace Owens' side says they haven't provided us any information. Clearly, the truth is somewhere in the middle. If it comes out in discovery that Brigitte Macron provided none of this information, then Candace Owens is going to win this lawsuit. She's going to win this lawsuit because she's entitled to her opinions. We'll just see how reckless that is. So here is Candace Owens' update as to what she thinks actually went down after Xavier Poussard's, investigative journalism for several years, after everything she's covered. Here's what Candace thinks happened.
Okay, so this is my opinion. Opinion is protected speech, okay? For those of you who have watched the series, you understand the web.
It's only protected until the other person provides evidence that would make your opinion no longer valid. In that case, it's malicious. But that's, hey, I'm not a defamation lawyer.
The story that emerges to me that makes the most sense, and I think a lot of people might agree with this, is that it is very clear that Brigitte Trogneau existed. It is very clear that she was, in fact, the sister of Jean-Michel Trogneau. And I think that if I am guessing what took place here, Jean-Michel Trogneau took Brigitte Trogneau's identity at some point. It's very obvious he kind of becomes his sister. That's what seems to be the most logical conclusion based off of everything. And that would explain, because it's too wild of a theory to think that all of the siblings, even though the children, Tefan and her two siblings, yeah, they don't speak much, but if you would eventually speak out and say that is my parent or that's not my parent, but they're silent. And I think that their silence probably indicates that they are related to Brigitte in some way, right? So perhaps that's not their mother. I don't believe that is their birth mother. That is in the Élysée Palace right now, but it is somebody that they know and someone that they have been around their entire lives. Namely, that would be an uncle, right? Like Jean-Michel Trogneau, the original Jean-Michel Trogneau that we saw in that young photo from Amiens.
So just for my own dumb brain here, Candace Owens believes she's entitled to protected opinion to an extent, but she believes that Brigitte Macron, the one we know today, the one who's married to Emmanuel Macron, took the identity of Brigitte Macron when she was really Jean. And the question then becomes, where is the original Brigitte? Again, if you believe this is too far of a stretch for me to believe, but I am offering grace to those who do believe this.
I think is their uncle. So the question that people ask is, okay, if you're operating under that theory, what happened to the real Brigitte Trogneau? Based on everything that we know about Macron's parents, their involvement in the trans cause, trying to get IDs for transgendered individuals, fighting for trans rights, so to speak, based on what we know about Veronique, if you subscribe to the idea that Brigitte, before she became Brigitte, Jean-Michel Trogneau perhaps lived as Veronique. If you guys have not watched the series, you're going to be very lost right now. But for those of you that did, lived as a while as Veronique. Well, that was during a time when trans people could not become somebody else. So if you are wanting to transition and you're living in the 80s and you are not allowed to just become somebody else under the law, what are you going to do? You need to have somebody who is dead or dying. You have to kind of become part of a network of people that are willing to give IDs, right? That are willing to give you IDs. This kind of Mimi Marchand, she was fashioning IDs, getting IDs. I mean, those stuff that she's being accused of is forgery and things of that nature.
And by the way, this is the type of stuff that Candace is getting sued for, right? This idea, the accusation that Brigitte is committing identity theft. But again, if you were to just follow Candace's side, this idea that Brigitte was living as Veronique, and Veronique, they have this sample of Veronique on some TV show years ago, and the voices line up. And if you take things from one logical leap to the next, you could make that assumption. I just operate, and give me grace, because I'll give you guys grace. I operate in a world where the simple answer is usually the most accurate one, which is that Brigitte Macron was born a woman, and that's who she is. Now, if all of this information comes out where Candace is right, I'd be like, all right, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, I was wrong. I just tend to, be a skeptic when it comes to stuff like this.
And so if we are to believe that, I do believe that Brigitte Trogneau, the real Brigitte Trogneau, existed, it's plausible that Brigitte Trogneau got sick, that the real Brigitte Trogneau got sick and perhaps had a dying wish to help her brother, Jean-Michel Trogneau, who was living perhaps as Veronique, right? And knowing that, okay, well, he's never going to be allowed to live his life authentically. He's always going to be always going to be hiding and doing these sorts of things, because this is just not a time where people are recognizing this transgendered identity.
So it's really just a love story between a brother and a sister. Brigitte Macron on her deathbed says, Jean-Michel, here's my social security card or whatever. This is that old French rap song. Would the real Brigitte Macron please stand up? And again, I'm not trying to mock people. This is like, look, when I started covering this, people said, Dave, you got to watch the docuseries in order to understand. So I took the time to watch the docuseries. I'm no longer closer to believing it, but I do understand how people would. And I think for the most part, audiences are good meaning. And if they want to believe it, fine. It's not like Candace necessarily pulled this out of her ass. There is a very plausible story where you get to this finish line. I just am not there yet. I'm not there yet. But again, when you say that, people go, oh, you're paid for by the Macron family. You're deep state French, whatever. And it's like, look, I get it. I did study abroad in France. I did. Je suis désolé. J'habitais à Marseille. I don't know why that's where I ended up. But I'm not there. But that's okay. Hey, we're going to keep covering it, It's one of those situations where it's like, change my mind.
Well, what if she gifted her brother her identity? Here, this is not a thing yet. You can just become me. Okay, that's, again, we're surmising. There's no evidence that Brigitte Trogneau died. There's no evidence of that. I'm just saying that when I put all the pieces together and I look at all of the cast of characters and I think of the reason why Tefan would be the only person to speak out in the family about this stuff. Well, Tefan's the youngest. Tefan would have the least memory. If this theory is correct or holds any weight, Tefan would not remember her birth mother as much as the other children were. They're a lot older than her, old enough to have real memories of their mother. And so they would be uncomfortable, perhaps publicly representing that this is my mother. They would be comfortable being around this person if all you've known is that this is your uncle.
Okay, so a lot of ifs, conditional statements. We'll leave it there. You can go check out the full rationalization by Candace. Now, she's doing a good job in saying this is my protected opinion here. But like I said before, did she cover all of her bases? That's what it's going to come down to with this defamation suit. And this idea that Candace proposed that the Macrons, they don't sue people for calling her a man. They sue them for all of the tertiary items, the places where they make mistakes. And it's like, well, that's because in France, and as it appears here in the United States, it is not defamatory to call somebody trans. What is defamatory is calling them a liar and the conspiracy, the cover up, and all those other things. Will Brigitte Macron be able to convince a judge that she's lost parts of her livelihood over this? It'll be very interesting. In the grand scheme of things, Brigitte Macron has done more harm in the short term by filing this lawsuit because it's really created a bigger ecosystem of people interested to cover it. But with that said, look, if you feel like in your heart of hearts, if Brigitte Macron filed this lawsuit because she feels like she is done being pushed around and she wants to put an end to it, then good for her. But also, she could make like a TikTok video, showing, here's all of the proof or whatever. And the reason why she might not have done that in the past is maybe she feels like that's beneath her. But this, listen, okay, if you're gonna play in the mud with YouTubers, with us, pond scum, you're gonna get dirty. And this is the game that Candace is playing. Folks will argue, listen, it's not about that she's trans, it's about the ring, the this and that. And by the way, I'm trying not to use certain words because I keep getting demonetized here. It's a very, very sensitive case to cover when it comes to the YouTube algorithm. But I'm just not there. And I don't know, I think a lot of people are, but I was looking at a Reddit subreddit for Joe Rogan where they shared this story. The real Brigitte Macron died on her deathbed wish was to give her identity to her brother, the fake Brigitte Macron. The top comment was, "God damn, this is weapons grade stupid." And who knows? Someone said the stupid part is that the real story of their marriage is already creepy enough. Embellishing it just looks like you're trying too hard. So again, we'll have updates. I will be interviewing a lawyer this week on air, and we'll continue to cover this. Again, I'm being as polite as possible to the possibility and having the grace that I'm on the wrong side of this. That's kind of where I stand right now. My opinion is subject to change. Would I bet my life savings that Brigitte Macron was born a woman? No. Would I bet my life savings that Brigitte Macron was born a man? No. I wouldn't bet on this one. I think it's 80-20 right now, 90-10. You know what I mean? That's kind of where I'm at. By the way, we're almost at 139,000 subscribers, so do me a solid. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Helps out the channel. Now, if you're interested in that story, this one's just as crazy. Have you seen Dancing for the Devil on TikTok? It's about that dance cult that involves plenty of people that you've seen on your TikTok. The Wilkie sisters, right? One of the sisters is in the cult, one isn't. The people that are in the cult say it's not a cult, but the cult was exposed by friend of the show, Katie Joy. Her Instagram handle's Without a Crystal Ball. I'm going to share what Katie Joy had to say as this cult was raided last week. Here's actually the footage of the raid happening just outside of Los Angeles. They bought a church and turned it into like a den.
Tahunga neighborhood rocked by flashbangs. Federal agents storm a property tied to the shocking allegations of sex trafficking. That dramatic raid today tied to an alleged TikTok cult.
Fox 11's Gina Silva. She joins us now live in Tahunga with more there. Gina?
Well, it may have started as a Netflix documentary, but now it is a full-blown federal investigation.
And by the way, we'll have to see if Netflix is going to add any more episodes to the documentary. But wild time to be alive that the lead investigator, the one who broke this story open, is a YouTuber, Katie Joy. Here's what she had to say on News Nation.
Case, Katie Joy, a journalist who originally broke the story. Katie, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Spoke to the FBI about Shin a year ago, when you were swatted by the church, but then got ghosted by authorities. So what's going on?
This is a long time coming. I'd say more than just my report to the FBI. There was several reports. In fact, I know as far back as March or April of 2022, former members were reporting that they had reported him to the IRS, and they were reporting him to the IRS because he was converting money through his taking donations through the church and then siphoning that out into his for-profit businesses.
And what's really interesting with this case is it's a church. He's also like a manager of these TikTok creators. So he's taking a percentage of the money they make, which makes it ultra culty, right? Because first of all, sometimes managers serve a good purpose and sometimes they're very lecherous. It really depends on who you have and who you trust, right? But again, a lot of times these cults or sometimes in the mob, the way they're taken down is by financial issues. Were they hiding their money in a tax-free church? And by the way, I think all churches should be taxed. I'm sick of this Scientology or some crazy evangelical pastor who's preaching hate, getting into politics. I'm sick of them getting a tax write-off. Everyone should pay their taxes, fair amount, churches included. And then, maybe we don't have to worry about cults and evangelical leaders with their $400 sneakers and their private jets flying them around, doing the God's work, by the way. So that's just where I stand. I'm all about, hey, because help pay for, programs that help the poor and the lower class and things like that. I know. Anyway, you get my point. So there is your update. We'll let you know what comes of this. I just wanted to let folks know I didn't cover this the last few days, but this TikTok dance cult getting raided, we'll see what comes of it. We'll see what they find. But this is a very big deal. Justice moves very slowly sometimes. They already had the documentary out, which left people on a note that there could be more done. If you haven't seen the documentary, I'm not spoiling anything. I found it interesting. It wasn't like a smoking gun case where these people are harmed, because the folks in the cult are saying, no, we're perfectly fine, we're happy, this and that. It's the folks that have left the cult that are saying, no, this is high control religion, this is all these other things. So go watch it on Netflix, you be the judge, but it's an ongoing story that will continue to break down. All right, coming up next, this is how it works if you're new to the channel. I break up the pop culture from the politics, because not everybody wants one or the other. I don't want to trigger you if you don't want to hear about AIPAC, but coming up next, we've got the humanitarian crisis that's happening in Gaza, the senators that are receiving aid that's not helping the cause, right? They're bought and paid for. What that all means, we'll break that down with an Epstein update. That story coming next.